My wife says to me, Mosh, you don't care what people think about you. And I said, no, my competition's in the mirror every morning.
Oh.
And when I get in the mirror, I tell myself every morning, I love myself. I like the person that I see today. And that's not always easy, but it's necessary, because if you have that negative mindset, you're going to have a negative life.
Going back 15, 20 years, were you a tyrant? Were you absent?
I grew up poor, and I remember using socks as toilet paper. That's how poor I was.
Wow.
I've never forgot that. So I've always had that mindset. And my daughter even says it to this day. She goes, you always give back. Even if you have nothing, you give back. And I said, just, it's who I am. Remember where you came from. Never forget it. Because the process really is the prize. You said the journey, right? The mountain is different for every one of us. There's not one way up the mountain. There's going to be a lot of U-turns and a lot of wrong lefts and a lot of wrong rights, and there's going to be a lot of dips and valleys along the way.
If you're programming your mind to look for opportunities, your brain's now going to naturally look for opportunities, right? Vice versa. If you're always looking for lack, if you're always looking for, things to complain about, guess what? Those too shall appear.
I think the best thing I can tell someone is make sure this mind gets enough rest, because that's your operating system.
Agree.
And if you have a shitty operating system, you ain't going to do well.
Jon, welcome to the show, my man. It is an honor to have you in the studio today.
Thanks for having me, Karl. Always a pleasure.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. As I'm sitting here, I'm freaking cold, and I was going to say something about this just before we hit record. And I'm like, wait a minute. Why am I saying I'm cold when you actually live in the cold right now, where it's like freaking probably below zero? Man, Jon, I was going over your bio in your profile, and I really just want to paint the picture for the audience, because most people see the executive leader, right, with a suit, tie, with the McGill MBA, all the awards and declarations and corporate titles. But man, you were honest enough to list your background as a reckless youth with emotional scarring. Most people listening right now are probably kind of pinning this picture as this executive leader, right? With, all this wonderful education, academia experience, and so forth. But they don't see the guy, behind the scenes. They don't see the guy who had to fire his friends to survive. So paint us this picture, my man, if you can, of the man that you were 20 years ago versus the man that I see right now. What's the biggest difference?
Facing fear, learning from mistakes. 20 years ago, well, it's over 25 years ago, I started my career 18. No real role model. I came from a single parent family, didn't want to go to school. So I followed in my dad's footsteps, went to work at a local steel mill. That's where I got my start, but was never a very union-minded guy like my dad was. Was there just for the pay, and just became a workaholic, to be honest with you. I worked shift work, kind of secluded, no social life. And then, just over the years, I had defining moments. Like my divorce was 10 years into my career. That was a hard thing. I had to look in the mirror. I didn't like what I saw. And I had to look at my part and how I could be better. That was a challenging time. I've done a lot of root work in my life, mostly in my teens and early years, but I had to do it again in my 20s and address some of those things. My first marriage failed after, I think, 18 months. We were together for 9 years, those types of things. And then not that long after that, I was remarried, and my best friend that I met at a younger age, changing my life around, it was very, we were best friends forever. He got pancreatic cancer, and that was hard because I knew he was going to die, and I lost a friend. I lost a friend when I was 16. He was murdered, so I was going to lose my next best friend, and that was hard. And I remember him just telling me I wasn't limited to my potential. So it was more of suiting up and showing up. So that put me back into school, because if I didn't go back to school, society says you have to have these letters behind your name. I don't necessarily believe that, but they seem to prioritize that over anything. So I wanted to fit that mold for them. And then along the way, I just realized that I didn't belong. And I always knew that. And then I decided, like I said, after re-educating myself for a few years, I got 2 different kind of diplomas, 1 certificate, 1 diploma. And I realized that my true calling wasn't in steel. It was more around something that I was, part of steel circular economy and circular steelmaking, but making an even bigger impact in terms of sustainability, ESG. And then I've always been a hungry knowledge learner. I've always been a sponge, right? And
Nice.
I always said that's something no one can take away from me is my love for learning. So
Agreed.
learning AI and things like that, meeting with people like you and other people and just getting better from being around that circle, and decided to kind of go the entrepreneurial route just because, to be honest with you, if I didn't do it now, I wasn't going to do it.
Ooh.
And I have a 10-year-old. I took the last couple of years off by choice, and I wanted to give back to my daughter. But most of all is there's a course they don't teach in school. It's failure. They don't teach failure. So now my daughter gets to see her dad go out in the real world. You know how entrepreneurship is. It's unforgiving.
Yes.
She gets to see that. She gets to see me maybe get kicked down a couple of times, but she gets to see me get back up. And that's something that those letters, that schooling would never have given me. And those were the things that I learned in my 20s, is the hard knock life. And even in my teens, is those life lessons, even though they suck and they're very hard sometimes, there's always another reward. And my wife says to me, Mosh, you don't care what people think about you. And I said, no, my competition's in the mirror every morning.
Oh,
That's who I see. And I can't compete against Elon Musk. We don't have the same DNA, the same, chromosomes. He's his own person. I'm my own person. I can only control me. Good for them, but I only can focus on me. And when I get in the mirror, I tell myself every morning, I love myself. I like the person that I see today. And that's not always easy, but it's necessary, because if you have that negative mindset, you're going to have a negative life.
hey, real quick before we keep going, if you've been listening to this conversation and something hit a nerve, if something we talked about made you pause, or you felt that little tug in your chest, like, man, that one was for me, I want you to lean into that for a second. Don't just brush it off. Because here's the thing, conversations like this, yes, they're great. And I love doing this show. I really do. But if I'm being real with you, a conversation can only take you so far. At some point, you got to stop nodding along and actually do something with that feeling. So here's what I want you to do. I want to personally invite you to something we built called the Reforge Challenge. It's a live 5-day experience I created specifically for people like you, high performers who know they're capable of more, but something got knocked sideways and your old playbook just stopped working. Or maybe life smacked you in the face with a 2x4 that you just didn't see coming. Maybe the fire just dimmed and you can't figure out how to reignite it. 5 days, 5 real identity shifts, live coaching, real community, and the kind of honest conversations that actually move the needle. Not just another thing you consume and forget by Friday. Listen, you're not broken. You're just in between versions. And I'd love for you to come see what we've built. Head on over to the reforgechallenge.com. Again, reforgechallenge.com. Check it out. See if it speaks to you. And if it does, I'll see you inside. All right, let's get back to it. There is a lot that the more you and I talk, because you and I have had a lot of conversations outside of this, right? But the more you and I talk, man, it just makes me realize how much you and I have in common. Similar to you, I had a very unstable childhood, broken home, 5 years old, went through a bunch of abuse when I was with my mother, and nothing against my father. He wasn't present in my life or for the first part of my life, and thankfully today he and I have a very different relationship. But a lot of that stemmed and programmed who and how I was showing up as, throughout the rest of my life, right? So that being said, let's talk about some of this programming that you might have received in that earlier portion, because we're talking about emotional scarring. Well, dude, that's setting the stage, right? In our younger years, we're programmed, we're a lot more vulnerable, we're a lot more susceptible to that type of programming, whether it's our parents, our loved ones, friends, business partners, best friends, right? So again, you mentioned this emotional scarring. How did that specifically show up in your leadership back then? Were you, when I say back then, you know, going back 15, 20 years, were you a tyrant? Were you absent? You know, walk me through this, or walk, you know, the audience through this process. Like, how did you see that impact in your life back then?
I always say this is my best teacher was my kindergarten teacher. And I'm thankful for a few things from my mom. And the one thing that I'm very thankful for is she planted a seed of emotional intelligence at a young age. She wasn't the best mom. She struggled. She struggled with mental health. My parents were divorced before I was born. I have an older sibling that's about 11 years old. So I felt like a mistake my whole life because they were divorced. And, my dad traveled the world, so I got to see only a side of him, here and there. My mom struggled with it. She still to this day kind of sometimes struggles mentally with mental health issues. Yeah, my upbringing wasn't great. So I've always had that look of that iceberg that we see the common picture today is never judge a book by its cover.
Agreed.
Is meet them where they are. I grew up poor. And I remember using socks as toilet paper. That's how poor I was.
Wow.
I've never forgot that. So I've always had that mindset. And my daughter even says it to this day. She goes, you always give back. Even if you have nothing, you give back. And I said, just it's who I am. And I think that's always shown up in my leadership is think about other people because you don't know what side of the tracks they've grown up on. You don't know what's in that closet. And you have to have, you can't just judge the book by one incident. You have to give them sometimes the benefit of the doubt, and you have to give them an open ear.
Yeah, man, I love that. That reminds me of something I heard a long time ago, you know, to be kind to everybody because you have no idea the battles that they're fighting within, you know, inside their own minds. You know, to your point, the only competition we have is the person we see in the mirror, you know. It's not Elon Musk, it's not, you know, all these people that we see. It's, dude, they have different drive, they have different talents, skills, chromosomes, yeah, or lack thereof. But that's a very valid point, man. Let's dive in more into some of this trauma that you experienced. When I'm talking about trauma, you mentioned earlier, you know, losing two best friends, you know, then the divorce, and man, coming from the childhood you had, you know, and the instability, the emotional health or lack thereof, and then, you know, going through a divorce, and that can cause a consistent feedback loop of making somebody think I'm not made for this, right? Why is this happening to me? Like this, having this victim mentality, right? Why me? Woe is me. And just get further into the trenches, right? So, you know, take us to that basement. You went through that season of hell, right? Through a divorce, losing your best friend, or, you know, your best friends, you lost two of them. Take us to that last conversation you had with them. And I remember that you and I talked about this separately, but just fill everybody else in. What were the exact words he left you in his dying moments?
He was living with his mom. He was trying to sell his house. He had pancreatic cancer at a really young age, 34. He got some experimental treatment, which kept him around a little bit longer. And I didn't think, because he still had a little bit of energy, so I didn't actually know, but I went over for a house for coffee. He was trying to fix up his house. And my wife had just had our daughter Violet. And he said, don't come help, like spend time with your kid. So I went over to his mom's house for coffee, and that was ended up being our last conversation. He had passed away, a little while later. And he just looked at me and said, I'm going to eventually pass away at some point. And he had a serious conversation. It was just more about him, how people were going to gather at his funeral and talk about how he didn't live up to his potential, because he was the same way. He didn't finish high school. He went through addiction. That's where I met him at a young age. And then he, as an adult, realized that he wasn't an addict, and he was more of a youth being a youth, no guidance.
Yeah.
And he didn't go to school. He ended up getting a job with high risk youth as a mentor and as a counselor. And then he loved computers. So him and his dad used to actually buy computer parts and rebuild computers back in the day, like, build their own personal computers for people.
Yeah.
And that was how he lived. And he just said, that's what I'm going to be remembered for. And he said, people are going to say I didn't live with my potential. And that's when he looked at me and said, you're making the same fucking mistake that I am. And he said, you know what you're capable of, and I see it in you. And he goes, it's sad to watch you just sit there. And I didn't like what he said. I remember getting in my car. I remember coming home. I remember yelling in my car, screaming. And luckily the windows were closed. And I came home and I looked at my wife and I said, I'm going back to school and I'm going to leave the union and become a manager. And she kind of said, that's, and I didn't give her any context before that. I just blurred the words out and I got really teary and she was, what up? And I said, I had a conversation with Jeremy. This is what we talked about. And she said, wow, that's what he said to you. And I said, yeah. And I said, a while later, he passed away. And I was thankful that he said it to me, because if he didn't, I probably would have stayed stuck.
As he's having a conversation with you, what's going through your head in that moment? Because you did say you were angry, right? Were you angry at him, or were you angry with yourself, or were you both? Were you angry at him first because he said that to you, but then you started to realize, shit.
I was more angry in the car after I left.
Yeah.
I was fine there. I'll never forget the day I came back from Chicago and he phoned me and told me I had pancreatic cancer.
Mm.
And I was the first person he told, even before his parents. And that was when Steve Jobs had pancreatic cancer. And I knew that my wife's a nurse. And he's like, I'll beat it. That was his mentality, knowing that it's a death sentence, right? And I always just said to myself from that day, cherish every moment, because you don't know when the end's going to be. He always had a great mindset towards it, and he always thought I was going to get better. Then eventually he realized, I think it comes down to you meet your maker, and internally you start thinking. And he lost his girlfriend at the time, someone that he had been, with for a long time. She left, he was living with his mom. His health deteriorated because of the chemo, and it's aggressive chemo. He was trying some of these experimental treatments. So I wasn't mad at him. I was mad about the truth. It was being more mad at myself, because I was self-aware enough to know. And I just, wasn't that I was lazy. It was just, I was stuck. I was stuck in that marriage, not knowing, not tackling I didn't say not tackling my fears, but just not putting in the onus that I did as a kid. As a kid, I was fearless. The shit that I was doing as a teenager, and then I kind of just got a career, that white picket fence, you make a nice healthy wage, and things just stopped. I just kind of said, okay, this is what society says you're supposed to have. I don't know any better. I'll just keep working, making money, get a pension, and live that life, because that's all I ever knew, right? Everyone around me was, oh, you're doing good, and I was never doing good life. I was always the black sheep of the family. So having that, I guess, recognition kind of was like, okay, I'm obviously doing something good. So I just stayed. And what he said to me was just looking in that mirror and seeing what I always saw, but was just too naive to admit.
Fortunately, you took that for what he intended, right? I can't tell you how many people that I can think of right off the top of my head that I've had conversations with in the same context of wanting to see them do better in the place of love, like your friend has shared with you, right? Like I've seen, and it's ironic in how we can see potential in others, but not in ourselves, right? But unfortunately, too many people, when we truly want more for somebody, want them to do better, we get pissed off at them, right? And we don't do anything about it. And we distance ourselves away from them. We cancel them and do all this other stuff. And then, where does that lead us? So, but fortunately for you, that's where life changed for you, if I'm understanding correctly. That's where you really said, this is my wake up call. This is, I look in the mirror, and I didn't like what I see. Right.
Well, it was the second wake up call. I had one early in my teenage life. And that led me to him. And that was more of, I was, as a young teen, well, we'll even go back, I was 8 years old. My grandfather gave me a sip of beer at 8. That was my mom's dad. My mom spent a lot of time with my grandpa and grandma. I had both sets of grandparents that lived here. One was very kind of stern, my mom's dad. My dad's dad, loving, giving, joyful, funny. But he had emphysema because he smoked at a young age. I don't remember quite the age, but anyway, I was 8. My grandpa gave me some beer, and I remember having more and a few more. And then I remember not feeling good. And then I remember going over to their house, and they had the liquor bottle hanging downwards with the little thing, and taking a beer bottle cap and filling it up and drinking it and throwing the beer bottle cap into the garbage. And that led me down a bad path as a kid. I was very angry. Violence was a big part of my life. Um, no role model. 16 came along, and 1997 was a bad year. 1997, I lost my best friend who was murdered. And I also, before that, I lost my grandfather, Pete. And he was probably the only guy in my family that understood me. Because I think when he was younger, he was a bootlegger, made his own moonshine. I think maybe had some crashes with the law, and I was headed in the same path. And then I just went off, and what had been going off for years, and that ended me up in a hospital a few months before my 17th birthday, and I still don't know to this day how I got to the hospital. So someone out there made a call that probably saved my life. But I remember talking to the doctor saying your heart's going to explode if you keep this up. And I was a crackhead. I was addicted to crack cocaine at a young age, and that's where it materialized. And I remember coming home, and I remember going back out. I was a boxer. I liked the box. So I went back out to the reserve. Really got into the spiritual side of things, kind of calmed down for a few months, but it only lasted for a few months. My birthday was coming up. The party came, and then and it's funny because when I was 12 years old, I have a vivid memory of my mom inviting this guy over, and he asked me to go for coffee. I'll never forget this. He took me to a church, and it was an NA meeting. And I was at 12 years old, and you fast forward, and I was almost 17, and I reached out to him. I said, "Look, this had happened, but it was under more of false pretenses. I was trying to beat a charge as a young offender, and I had to stay sober for a year in order for conditions. So I did, and that's where I met Jeremy. That's how I met Jeremy at the same time, and did a lot of root work as a kid. I remember as early as 10 years old going to what we have as a student counselor, I guess, in elementary school, and saying, "Hey, I think I need to talk to somebody." And I did that on my own free will. So I've always, as a young kid, had that edge to talk about my feelings and realize something. There was a cycle that I could see as a young kid that I knew I needed to break. I just didn't know how to necessarily break it. Yeah, and I went to that program for the year. Became very close with Jeremy, and then I went back to the way I was. And Jeremy never forgot about me. He would come pick me up from a party and take me to Cruise Albert and just drive around. He had a car with a loud stereo, and I always liked that adrenaline of the loud stereo. And he knew that, and eventually I was, and I was kicked out of school, and someone, he was my vice principal, and he said something to me that still irks me to this day, but not as much as it did then. And he said, "I doubt you'll live to see your 18 year birthday."
Mm.
And he was right. I was going to either end up in a box or in a jail cell. And I used that, Karl, as motivation. I used that to basically say F you. So he left being a teacher. He eventually became a public civil servant here in the city that I live. And I used to send him a letter every year.
Really?
And I knew his address because I was friends with his daughter and his son. And I would send him a registered letter every year saying it's my 19th birthday, my 20th, 21, 22. And then I stopped after 23 because that's my lucky number.
I remember you telling me about this.
I thank him for saying, because it bothered me, but he was right. And the negative, I guess the resentment I had for him saying that was enough for me to say, okay, you know what? So when I was 17, I kind of sobered my life around 18 because it was either that or I was going to jail. So I had a choice. So I jumped into I'd already been there for a year. I'd seen what it was. I felt a little bit of understanding, and I knew that I needed to do some more interior root work. So I was able to do that my late teens and then the start of my career. And then, like I said, the first the girl that I married was an alcoholic, right? So, and I always knew that. I just codependent, um, but I never had a family, right? And so I was kind of in their family. Their family gathered for Christmas. I never really had that. As a kid, I grew up in that single parent family where one year I went to my dad's family, the next year was my mom's, and it was always torn. Where their family was also torn and had its own. Every family has it, I think.
Yeah.
But I
100%.
felt, I felt like there was something there. So that always kept me there when I knew. And she had a little brother, and I was an only child, or I had an older sister that was 11 years older, but she moved out when I was 5. I moved out when I was 16 as well. So I had a little guy that looked up to me. And I loved that because it was like, okay, here, and I saw the cycle. So it was like, here's my giving back.
Mm.
And people always say I have like the wounded bird syndrome, but I like to help people. So I stayed somewhere where even that marriage, like I said, we were together for 9 years. We got married. We were together for, I think after 5 years, she kind of gave me an ultimatum, and I didn't have the balls. The night before I was supposed to get married, I sat outside of a parking lot. Jeremy saw me and wanted to walk away. And I didn't, because I didn't want to disappoint the 350 people that were showing up.
Oh.
So, and then a year and a half later, we were marriage counseling, and 2010 we were separated and went through a pretty bad divorce. But nonetheless, there were my decisions that it was the fear of not jumping into failure that caused me, right? And so I've always said is go out, make a mistake, get up, learn from it, and take the pain, take the good, the bad, the ugly, and reverse it into something that fits for you, because the process is really the prize.
Agree. If I, I'm of the belief, and this is what I'm hearing from you, is all of this is part of the journey, right? This is part of the journey of life. It is the peaks, the valleys, in between, the roads, and too many people have shunned the journey of growth because they feel like it's abnormal, right? Like we're not supposed to have problems. We're not supposed to have adversities. We're not supposed to have challenges. And I'm not sure how this came to be, but for whatever reason, just in the last couple of decades, or even the last 10 years, maybe, from what I could tell, there just seems to be this shift where we're not supposed to have problems. That's the perception, and it's like that's a farce, because that's precisely what defines us, right? The problems, the adversities, the things we've been through, the storms that we've had to weather, and this is how we grow. This is how we get resilient. This is how we get away from anxiety. This is how we get away from that life of just constant chaos, because you start to learn how to get stronger. Just like going to the gym, right? I mean, what's the consequence of going to the gym? You get stronger. You're able to lift heavier weight. Well, no shit. It's just the same principle applies to the rest of our area, right? We're still working that mental gym, working out, going through adversity. That's our workout. We're like our bodies. We're putting them through challenges. We're putting them through periods of growth. Well, we got to do that for our minds. We got to put them into the gym, get, and go through that. I mentioned a couple things I really want to, especially the number 23, because you and I have had some conversation, that lucky number 23, which is what inspired you to create a lot of the things that you're doing now, right? Which is something I really want to jam into. You've had the last, 20 years, or 30 years where you went through some tremendous growth and so forth. And in your profile, you mentioned something that I think a lot of people can resonate with and battle with, is battling that imposter syndrome, right? Give us a specific example of a time where, where imposter syndrome was in full force, either where you were getting your MBA, felt like a fraud and almost quit, or, give us another scenario, or multiple if you want, but help us understand how it affected you.
When I came home, I told my wife I was going back to school. I went back to work and left the union, and they put me through metallurgy school. I had to pay for it, and the operations, metallurgy, the science of steel. And I'll never forget, I got my textbooks, did it online through Hamilton, and did it online while I was working. And I was sitting in one of our morning meetings, and our QA guy walks up to me and says, "Did you get that from my office?" I said, "No." And he goes, "Well, that's my PhD textbook." And I'm looking at him, and I said, "That's why I can't understand one fucking word that's in here." And
Yeah.
and the course hadn't even started. I just got my textbooks. And I remember like reading, and I'm like, I couldn't comprehend this stuff, Karl. I just
Mm.
couldn't. And then I remember sitting down, and I just said, outwork them. Out
Mm.
fucking work them. So I outworked them. Probably too much. Probably more like a workaholic, because I had a full-time job, and I spent probably another full-time job just studying and learning and figuring shit out and how to do this. 2 years came. I finished. I used a lot of resources that I worked with, asked them questions, said, dumb it down for me. I had a lot of experts working in steel. I said, dumb it down, like make it a 10-year-old can understand this, right? So they
Yeah.
did. And then I was starting to get it. And then I just kept putting myself out there, asking for help from, reaching out to people. And then my marks were good, really good, almost near perfect. And but the whole time, I felt like I didn't belong in there, because I just like, these people were just ringing off these answers, and like I would have to like, I would be using AI for sure. 100. And I would have had the meta glasses on and everything, because I had no clue. And I used to like sweat. I would be sitting here writing an exam, and my armpits would be stained, and I'd be at home. And I just kept, it was just outwork them. Just put in the reps. Just, like I said, it was probably to a point where I burnt myself out maybe a little bit. So it wasn't necessarily the healthiest thing, but it was more of just that 1%, that small win, focus on one good thing and keep building on it. And as I got that momentum, things got easier after about 6 months into it, 8 months. There were some challenges, but it was just remembering it's okay. I had a daughter at that time. I looked at her, used her for inspiration, and just kept saying, like, you're not going to go to the gym and get a six pack by doing 10 sit-ups.
Yep. Okay.
And that was kind of the thing I used to say to myself is, this is rumbling in your gut for a reason. You know why? You know what's on the other side of this. Go get it. And that's what I told myself really almost every day, because I was doing schoolwork almost every day and reading stuff that still probably doesn't make sense to me.
Makes sense, man. Makes sense. Thanks for sharing that. So, and again, this is, I think, an area where so many high achievers battle with, not just imposter syndrome, but also battling the two dudes, right? The old dudes being the old Jon, who was that, reckless youth, versus this new Jon, who's in this new season, if you will. It's focused on academia, focused on improving, focused on just constant 1%, which I'm going to dive here in a moment, because I hear some key numbers popping up, which are familiar. But, so talk to the Johns out there that are battling this, not only just imposter syndrome, but battling, how do you balance the old Jon, right? The blue collar, heavy industry, as well as, some of the things that, that person had to go through, versus this new Jon, without losing your edge.
Remember where you came from. Never forget it, because the process really is the prize. You said the journey, right? The mountain is different for every one of us. There's not one way up the mountain. There's going to be a lot of U-turns and a lot of wrong lefts and a lot of wrong rights. And there's going to be a lot of dips and valleys along the way. Stay true to who you are and what's in your heart, I think, is the big thing. The balance. And then, I think we think about, we'll use baseball as an analogy for this one, is everyone thinks about a home run or a grand slam, right? The especially with the World Series, right? Oh my God, he got a grand slam. But all you need is a walk, a bunt to get on base. So think about the small step in front of you, and then the next one after that, and then the one after that, and the one after that. Don't think about the top. In a year or two, look back and say, hey, where was I 2 years ago? You'll be really amazed where you went, is because you're not focusing on the end point, you're focusing on the now, the present. And I always say we call the present, it's named a gift for a reason. And so take that and don't necessarily worry about the end goal, because you're not going to probably get there tomorrow. No one built Rome in a day.
Nope.
So that probably took hundreds of years, right, back then. So be easy on yourself. Give yourself some slack. I always say don't skip 2 days in a row. It's okay if you skip one, but get back on the horse. Um, whether it's going to the gym, to me, it's about finding really great habits, and it's the ability to unlearn
Mm.
as well as learn. Because sometimes as we get older, we get complacent and we say, "Oh, I've always done this." But sometimes that, and even those people, those circles no longer serve us. So sometimes you have to unlearn those things to relearn new things. And change is not comfortable. No one likes it, but I will say no one likes change other than a young baby getting their diaper changed. Everybody hates it.
Yep.
It's a reason why it's hard, because we don't know what's on the other side of it, but we know if when our belly's rumbling and our guts are turning, we usually know there's good things on the other side. We just have to persevere. And I was sometimes when my gut's really rumbling, I'll pinch myself really hard,
Yeah.
and I'll say, "Well, that really hurt." In my mind, right? And
Yeah.
I'll say, if I can withstand that, this is nothing.
Agree.
And
Agree.
it's our
Unless you ate
mind.
Taco Bell.
Let's go to Taco Bell. Our mind. Our mind is a powerful tool. And
Agree. Yes.
once you change that mindset, if you think negative things, Karl, negative things will happen. You put
Agree.
yourself on negative people, negative shit's gonna happen for you.
Yes. You know,
You think you think positively, right? I always say a positive mindset and a grateful heart will open doors that you didn't even know even had a key.
agree wholeheartedly. One of the things that I'm hearing a theme on, especially here lately, but what I'm hearing from you is one of the most important things that I heard from you was surrounding, evaluating your environment, right? Surround yourself with the people who is keeping you uncomfortable. Uncomfortable meaning that it's like, man, I need to grow to get to their level, right? People that are challenging you in a good way, speaking life into you. Yeah, to your point, man, we've got to, just because the person got us to where we are and served us here doesn't mean they're going to be there, to get us to that next level and there to serve us for the next level, right? I mean, people are there for a season, a couple of years, decades, but they're not meant to be part of our lives for our whole lives,
Mhm.
and unfortunately, too many people are afraid to let go of the past because that's the familiar part, right? That's where they're comfortable. Or again, going back to your earlier point, our brains are wired to keep us comfortable, right? Anything that throws that out of whack, we're like, ah. But uh, our environment is everything, 100% of everything. Um, One thing, kind of turning, a corner here. What you told me earlier, or what you said earlier, reminded me of a book called Atomic Habits by James Clear. I saw there's that smile, right? So talk to me about this 37x return, because I heard it hinted several times. So let's kind of dive into some tactics here and really, get into brass tacks of what is 37x return and what is 1%. Talk us through that.
If you take 1.01, you times it by 365 days, that's where you get the 37x. So that means showing up 1%. So that's going to look different for everybody. It could be something as simple as going to the gym every day and increasing your resistance. It's all to the eye of the beholder, but it's more about if your end goal, let's say, is to lose 100 pounds. You might do that you might do that at 1 pound a day, 1 pound a week. And it's the things that you're taking, but it's that mindset of every day is being just 1% better than you were the day before. Whether it's a human, whether it's going to the gym, whether it's, baseball, pickleball, whatever you're doing, whatever goal you're trying to achieve, is putting that into mindset and having that mindset. And that was something instilled in me at a young age, because I was, like I said, I was going to end up in a box. And my boxing coach said to me, look, you don't have the talent, but you have the work ethic. You might not be gifted, but you don't need talent. You need work. So I outworked them and became a really good boxer doing it because of that 1% mindset. I thought I was going to get laid out, to be honest with you, and that wasn't the case. And when I saw that, I had that belief because he believed in me. And I saw that I put that work in, that daily grind, that when my friends were out partying, I used to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning as a teenager and run to school. I would run to school to go to the gym before class every day. That was my 1%. And then I would party all night and party hard and get up. But I lived a pretty hard life because I was burning the candle at both ends. But that was my 1% for the first little while, was that dedication to that work ethic. I was also undoing some of it. But I think for people, it's just focusing on their goal and taking it into small one piece Legos. Right? You don't build the Lego that comes in the box. You take that one piece and just look at that one piece and look at your goal every day and gear towards that. And just remember that you have to be better. And there's some days you may not want to get up. The alarm clock rings at 4 o'clock in the morning or 5 o'clock or whatever time you get up, and shit. I always tell people, put a picture of your daughter, your kid, put a picture of what your goal was there, and look at that and say, okay, well, that's what I want. If you're going to turn around and go back to bed or whatever, okay, fair enough. How bad do you really want it?
Agree.
Is the question I would ask you, is if that's your goal. But the 1% is showing up that 1% every day, 365 days a year, you get 37x.
Yeah.
Not to me is a personal, professional, not a lot of people, and I think the thing that people forget is you have to celebrate all of those wins. Is every day I have a habit before I go to bed, before my mind shuts off and the hamster wheel slows down up there.
Does it really slow down?
It does. And I say to myself, what am I grateful for today? And usually I had time with my daughter, I had time with my wife, I had a walk. They're very simple things 99% of the time. And it gives you that focus you don't have to think about that grand slam. Is thinking about that walk or that bunt and applying it to your life is, how is that 1% different for you? Whether it's reading 10 pages of a book, it could be so many different things, but it's the consistency. And that's what James Clear talks about, is you got to find those habits, but those habits are part of your goal, but it's a part of a system. And then as you get a habit, you're like, okay, I always like doing the gym. I feel good. Then it's okay. Well, now I want to read. Well, after the gym, I'll read. And now you have two. And once you start stacking those habits, the compounding effect, and it's looking back and saying, hey, you know what? I've read 20 books this year. I haven't read 20 books in the last 30 years, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And I think personally, it's celebrating those big wins. I think the 1% mindset would help a lot of organizations, because I think celebrating those wins as a team gets you the next win. And once you see that small win, it makes you hungry for the next one, because you see it and you feel good because of that dopamine hit.
Agree. And I believe that's where a lot of people get burnt out, because they don't take time to celebrate these small wins, and oftentimes miss them because they're looking for those major grand slams that you were talking about, right? Maybe it was a major deal, or they're looking back, man, there's nothing going right. Well, okay, you're breathing, you're more like, or you're enjoying the internet, or there are things. So there are wins that you can celebrate, right? So let's stop looking for those because what you were saying earlier, man, if you're programming your mind to look for opportunities, your brain's now going to naturally look for opportunities, right? Vice versa. If you're always looking for lack, if you're always looking for, things to complain about, guess what? Those too shall appear, right? Mm-hmm. So on a note of this journey of 1%, and this is a journey I've been on for a while too, so I could certainly resonate with this. And we often, overestimate what we can do in a year, but underestimate just how much, with consistency of how much we can achieve in a 3, 4, 5 year time span, right? So talk to that entrepreneur, that, well, what is that one habit, right, that could destroy that 1%? What is the thing that if you do it, you've pretty much lost a day?
Sleep.
I think a lot of people struggle with that one, especially right now.
I'm a Canadian and I love Dan Martell.
Yep.
And some of it is because part of his story is very similar to mine. He found coding in rehab. I didn't. I found other things. But nonetheless, he talks about exhausting the body to tame the mind.
Yeah.
And the gym. But then he talks about, but at the end of the day, I think he goes to bed around 9 o'clock or something. He has an alarm set at 9 o'clock to go to bed and gets up at 4 o'clock or whatever the time may be. Very similar to what I do. And and I really focus on that. That discipline. And I think another big thing is he's a big proponent of it is your health. I think your health shows your commitment and your discipline to people. But I think, mental health, whether it's meditating, all those things, is that by the time your head hits that pillow, all of your thoughts will be on a journal, on an iPad or something where your mind is blank and you're so damn tired because you grinded all day. And that doesn't mean grinding by binging on Netflix.
Agree.
Right? It means that you've talked to so many leads and you've sent so many outreach emails to people, or you've had so many networking, or is that your social battery's done, you've unwound. And most of the time I'm able to, it's not always like that. There's times where I fall off and I have to get back on but I always try to stay consistent, 7 to 7, 8 hours of sleep. And it's setting those patterns where I put my phone on another side of the room, get rid of those distractions. Another big one is eating late at night, before you go to bed, having, I used to drink coffee like water. I was immune to it. Now in the last 5, 6 years now, I had some health problems. I was burnt out. That's what I was. I had tension headaches and I was going to the bathroom all the time. And I didn't know what to do. So I cut coffee out of my life. And I used to have like probably 20 cups of coffee in a day.
Wow.
Like Starbucks used to know me by name. And my wife's amazed. She's like, you went from, and I said, because it was my health. And it didn't help. I still had some of those problems. And that's when I knew, okay, there's something wrong with me. And I was burnout. As I had just burnt the candle, both ends from school and all of those things. And then even then you have to learn to say no, set those boundaries. But I think the best thing I can tell someone is make sure this mind gets enough rest, because that's your operating system.
Agree.
And if you have a shitty operating system, you ain't going to do well.
Agree. 100%, man. You've got to rest, man. And you might get away with it for a short period of time in your younger days, but when you're more seasoned, it ain't going to fly much longer. I can completely relate to that.
I have things on my phone so I don't look at LinkedIn. I don't doom scroll. I set really tough parameters for myself. Like I can look at LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook for 3 minutes, 6 times a day.
3 minutes, 6 times a day. Interesting.
And as soon as you open the app, it says, "Is this important?" Because you look, and then I always put my phone down because it's a fidget, right? It's a habit, like smoking.
It is, man.
And then you lose 20 minutes because you've led to Amazon, and it leads to all these, we doom scroll. That's what society's come to. So like even some of those things. And the one big thing I did about 4 years ago or so is someone showed me how to put a gray light on my phone. Because the blue light on your phone keeps you awake. And then like you look at Apple's come out with the flow state, do not disturb. So all of those things, like there's all these tools to get rid of the notifications. Don't be on the grid 24/7. You don't need disconnect to reconnect.
Agree. I've gotten to the point where I actually turned off all notifications on my phone. I don't have any notifications. The only phone notification I get is phone calls. But I don't have any text. I get messages. I get all that. But I actually, to your point, I actually, gave myself time, instead of being intrusive. Because if I see a Facebook notification or LinkedIn notification or text notification, my train of thought is derailed. Now I'm thinking about, oh man, I wonder what that person posted or what they want. Or it could be, somebody, trying to, create an argument or whatever. Now my whole afternoon, morning, or whole day's derailed because of that conversation that I allowed to, interrupt my life, right? So on a note of this, man, I'd love to hear some insight from you. Talk to the Johns out there that are probably in a dead-end job or wrestling in this period, and they're hearing this 1% change, right? They're hearing what you're saying about 1% improvements every day, 37x, right? 37 times better than where you are today if you just focus on 1% improvement. So what would you recommend be the first change tomorrow morning? He wakes up, it's a brand new day. What would be the first thing you would recommend this Jon, if you will, that you do to aim for this 1%?
Meditate.
Ooh. I did not expect that answer, but that's a good one. Very good.
You need to slow the mind down. Whether it's box breathing, I'm just trying to think his name. It's Naval Rakonek's brother. I forget his name. He's got a book he talks about. I just read it, not that recently, but it was something about Mel Robbins and a high five in the morning.
Okay.
But he made a plan that he says, I love you, and which is something that I do. But he actually went in the mirror, and I still haven't done it. He goes in the mirror and stares at himself in the mirror for 5 minutes and goes through that. But he talked about meditation, and I have always done it. I actually bought an Oculus, about the first Oculus, the Meta headsets, and I have a meditation app on there. But I've always been big into box breathing, even from when I boxed. And just whenever I was stressed, I've just saw the effect of what that does. I think it centers you. I don't know why. I think that connection, I think just getting up, looking at where you want to go, and not thinking of the end goal, thinking of what's one little small step that I can do today that's going to get me a little bit closer to where I want to go. And then throughout that day, look at that goal, look where you are. Did I make that? Do I need to pivot it a bit? Do I need to alter it? Because like you said, someone sends you a LinkedIn request, you derailed the whole afternoon. So I think it's slow and steady. We see that book as a kid, The Tortoise and the Hare. Be the tortoise.
Yes. Yeah.
Be the tortoise.
Yeah.
Don't worry about the finish line. Just worry about the one. I would say to me, like a big component to me is meditation and reading.
Meditation is definitely high up there, in terms of resetting your nervous system and feeding your mind with good content, right? With reading, instead of getting on social media and just rotting your brain, especially in today's distraction era. So,
I get up at 4 a.m. usually.
Yeah,
there
me too, huh? Same.
And I make coffee. I usually have a sip of my coffee. I come down in my robe, in my underwear, and in my garage, I have a cold plunge.
You lost me there.
I put my head. I usually put one headphone in. I'll listen to a podcast or a song. I'll set my Apple Watch. I'll set it for 3 minutes, depending on the water temperature. Go into the water, put my hands under my armpit. I take one deep breath in, and then I go in. And then I exhale for a couple just to get the nervous system. And I sit in there for 3 minutes. And I listen to whatever podcast, usually it's Diary of a CEO because they're 3 hours long. So it lasts quite a while.
Yes, they do.
And I just sit there for the 3 minutes and I get up And I was usually like, 5 minutes before I could barely move. I was so tired. And then all of a sudden you're so alert. You're in that state. And then, like I said, I usually go and read and finish my coffee and go to the gym.
Love it.
And
That's a good
I
morning
work,
routine.
and that brings me back to my body temperature eventually. And then I go on with my day. And it's really eliminating. We have so many things that want to distract us. And that's, to me, the discipline is you have to have the discipline. I don't know who says it. It's more about what I don't do than
Yeah,
what I do.
agree. We're gonna that's gonna become one of my last set of questions as we wrap up here. Hearing some of the things you don't do, but I appreciate you sharing your morning routine with us because that's one of the big things that I stress with everybody I work with is your morning routine because that is the one time of your day that is in full control, right? It gives you position and confidence and so forth to start your day, with degree of confidence. Just you're fully present. You're in that flow state. You've your serotonin levels higher. You've got those dopamine hits because that degree of accomplishment. You've got your morning routine. You got your reading. You got your journaling, and you've listened to some positive content or you read some good content. Whereas the person who's doom scrolls the first thing in the morning, you know, they're they're just not in a good state to get their day going,
Mhm.
right? There's a couple of clients I used to work with. He's like, Karl, man, he's a heavy sports guy and bet a lot of money on in games and so forth. And he would look, first thing in the morning, he would look at the scores from the previous night, and that would dictate how his day was. And it's like, how's that working out for you? But well, cool, man. As we wrap up, man, I've got a couple of questions. I'm gonna kind of rapid fire through these. Just brief answers are perfect, but just be you, man. But because grit looks different for everybody in different seasons, right now in this specific season that you're in, because you're building a business, you're yeah, you're just building this business and you're navigating that chapter of your life. What does definition look like for you in this current season that you're in?
Keep repping, keep putting in the reps. And I think the more, and reach out for help, have that, ask people, be vulnerable, ask for help, if you're stuck somewhere. But it's just about showing up every day with that intent to, what's my goal? What do I want? How the hell am I going to get there? Because we don't know a lot of these things. If we had the perfect, we're not taught that in school. We're not taught entrepreneurship in school.
No, we're not. I
Um,
agree.
so there's a lot of things, and just listening to content, all of those things, and taking that and kind of molding it to how it fits John.
I agree, man. Love it, man. Keep putting in the reps, man. So, especially in today's state, man, we look at high achievers, and there's always the talk of adding more, right? Adding more habits, adding more processes, strategies, and you alluded to it earlier. But I really want to put that in a microscope in a moment because while those are appropriate, but in this season of life I'm in, I've been a lot more focused on what I need to subtract because also growth requires subtraction, right? So for you, either in this season or maybe in a past season, what was one habit, belief, or friction point that you've had to unlearn or to remove from your life so you can level up?
My network. When I left my career, I saw that my network was I was my career. That's all I ever knew. So it was looking at that friend inventory, and I've had to make it in the last probably year and a half, where I've just distanced myself from those people. I don't give them my energy anymore.
Ooh,
I was always the person that would reach out to people. I was always the one that I would always reach out. I just have kind of taken a step back, and it's shown me who's invested in John
yep.
and who's not. So those are that's one big thing that I've had to learn.
Nice.
The other thing I've had to learn is to I've always been vulnerable, but just ask for help. Don't just even think people don't understand. Just say it. Just say,
Yeah.
"Hey, you know what? I'm struggling, man," or "Hey, I'm struggling. I need help." And you'll be surprised. They may not have the answer for you, but they may know someone that does. So I think it's asking for help, and I'm learning that because we feel like I don't know what the word is, like needy, right? Like we're inconveniencing them, and generally they're not. We're not. Is they're more than glad to help us.
Yeah, I love that, man. Again, I just go back down to evaluating your environment. So, so as we wrap up, man, or get more towards it, what when the lights go out and you're finding yourself in the trenches? For me personally, there's usually like a quote or something I tell myself to kind of build myself up, or to, I hate to use the word motivation, but to to lift my spirits a bit, right? So for you, is there like a quote or directive that you repeat to yourself consistently to keep yourself moving forward?
Yeah, as my favorite fighter, Conor McGregor. And everyone knows Conor McGregor came from a
Yes.
plumber, and look what he's done with himself. That mindset.
Yeah.
You think it, you feel it, you see it, it'll happen. This is a guy that gets punched in the face for a living, or used to. And he
Yeah, I
said
used
the
to.
more you seek the uncomfortable, the more you become comfortable.
Yeah, he's probably one of my favorite fighters, man. In not just because of his fighting style, but because of he knows how to promote. You know,
He's a
and
showman.
oh yeah, he's definitely a showman. He's like, hey man, we're not here to take part, we're here to take over. That was one of the first things that I remember him saying. But cool, man. Almost lastly, as we high achievers, in my opinion, and this is an area that I struggle with sometimes, is we're expert critics of ourselves, right? And oftentimes it's one of the hardest areas. What I mean by that uh, is there an area of your life that where you needed to take 60 seconds of grace, to give yourself permission, or to give yourself, man, what is the term I'm looking for? Forgiveness for something that occurred in your past, or a failure or something of that nature, so that you can level up. Because oftentimes people have this backpack full of stuff, right? Full of garbage, shame, guilt, remorse, all this stuff that they experience. And they can't move up because all that stuff is just still holding them back. So, is there anything that comes to mind of any specific situation? You're like, man, Jon, dude, as you're looking in the mirror, I forgive you. I forgive you for fill in a blank. Is there anything that falls in an umbrella that you had to forgive yourself for so you can level up?
I forgive myself every day. I think I think of things in a small way because it just seems to work easier for me that way. I think the challenging way is something I've taken 60 seconds. Yeah, I think when Jeremy said that and I was in that car, that was my 60 seconds. I ranted. It
Yeah.
took 60 seconds and said, like, screaming, like, and I was swearing. I don't want to, because if you're on YouTube, they'll probably kick you off on how many swears I would say if I was to repeat it. But I remember, like, if someone was listening to me, they probably would have thought I was crazy. But what he said was the truth, right? And just
Yeah.
we don't like to hear the truth. And I think the other thing that I like to tell myself is I'm only going to find perfection in the dictionary, so just stop trying to be perfect.
Yes.
Just
I
just
Yeah.
be you. Just be
Yep.
you and show up authentically, good, bad, and ugly. If people don't like you, who cares?
Yep. Agree. Too many people get wrapped up about the illusion, right? I agree wholeheartedly, man. All right, man. So this last question comes in two parts. I did kind of prepare you, before we hit the record button, but this is a chain of iron that we're building here, right? And so I give every guest an opportunity to ask my future guest, what is one burning question that you will love to ask if you were me? Asking, and it's completely anonymous, right? I mean, I don't tell you who the next guest is, and my previous guests don't know, who my current guest is, right? So it's completely anonymous. So, think about this question as I'm asking this next one I'm about to ask you is, what is one question that you will love to ask this next guest that I'll be interviewing? As you're thinking about this, my last guest had this question for you. And again, completely anonymous,
Mhm.
right? And she's a firecracker, man. My last guest described herself as a dog with a bone, and someone who physically cannot let go of a problem, right? And she's a go getter. She is it's just that type of person who just is obsessive. Reminds me a lot of what you and I were just talking about, right? So her challenge to you is this: have you ever given up on something? And if so, what was the specific criteria that told you walking away was the right move?
My career I had hit a ceiling, and I knew that if I didn't leave, I was stuck and I didn't belong. It wasn't my career, it was my dad's career. I followed in his footsteps. I was grateful for the things that I learned. And if I was to do it over again, I'd probably do it the same way. But I knew my time was done. I knew I wasn't going to retire there. And I just knew that if I did, it was probably going to be my mind. And I wasn't happy. And I just, that to me was one of those things where I was, I've had family call me a pit bull, refusing to let go. So I like that she said that, dog with a bone, that ties in.
I
And
rest my case.
I knew for the longest time that I didn't belong. But it was my divorce, I think, was the kind of thing. If I don't go educate myself or start thinking about it, I only had a grade 12. Society doesn't really benefit. Look at today. There's people with PhDs that are looking for work.
Yeah, yeah,
And that's
exactly.
so I had to fit the mold that society wanted, and then I said, screw the mold. I'll just take my hard knock life lessons and do it myself because I know the boss that way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Real quickly, as we wrap this up, man, you mentioned a ceiling. So for the visual person out there who's trying to imagine this ceiling, what are you referring to an income potential, or is there another ceiling that you're referring to here?
No, development where you're just sometimes you'll see yourself as being the smartest person in the room and you want to be the dumbest
Ooh,
person.
yep, agree. That's
You
the
want to
room
be
you need to exit.
Yeah, you want to be in a room where you feel nervous because you feel whatever you say is going to be that's the right room because those are the people that are going to level you up because just you being in that room is going to challenge you and that's going to instead of coasting when you're at a room and you're just coasting and you're spinning your wheel.
Yeah. No, yeah, 100%. All this whole thing boils down to common theme of what? Evaluating your environment, right? Keeping your environment growth focus. Awesome. Jon, dude, I really appreciate you joining me and sharing the last hour with us, man. Thank you for not only just giving us the chief change officer version of the story. As easy as it is to come on here and talk about, the pretty stuff, right? The executive MBA and the awards and so forth. Where I really want to appreciate you in it is really allowing us to look at, this reckless youth, this person who didn't have the greatest upbringing, the greatest programming, and that's essentially where you started, right? In the pain, that it caused and this path, the inspiration you had from your best friend or two of your best friends. This really gives us a brutal insight of your reality, right? And the fire that it created for you to create the life that you have now, right? And granted, it maybe not the life of, what a lot of people would call success, but man, everybody's got their own version of success. So again, man, my hat's off to you for sharing your story. You didn't just share the 37x math. You showed us the scars and really gave a lot of people, some actionable steps for what they could do in their own life. So again, man, I appreciate you sharing that. Now, for the person who resonates with that struggle, maybe they're feeling like they've wasted their potential, or they're looking around, at their toxic environment or network even, and they know that they need to leave behind, right? Where can they find some information about you, or maybe they want to connect with you, or just say, hey, Jon, dude, bro, I can personally resonate with your story. Thank you for sharing. Can you be my pal? Where can they find you, man?
LinkedIn would be the best. My name on LinkedIn or my company set on LinkedIn is JT23 Impact Labs. Either way, you can DM me. Love to hear from you.
Awesome. We'll definitely be dropping all that in the notes. And by the way, dude, I forgot to bring this up, but this whole 23 that that shared just a glimpse, 60 seconds or less.
Okay.
Why was that such an inspirational number for you?
It's my birthday. It's my daughter's birthday. My sister's birthday. I was married twice on the 23rd. My friend was murdered on the 23rd. 2-3, February 3rd of 2023 was my first day of chapter 2 that I got to pick. So 3 years ago is when I left my career as of today.
Oh, wow.
And it's just, I played a little bit of basketball. I was a Jordan fan. It just always, as a young kid, it's always been a part of me, and it's never left.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Well, thanks for sharing it, my dude. Again, we'll be linking, your LinkedIn profile. I believe you have a website. We'll share that all in the show notes. So again, Jon, thank you, my dude, for stepping your arena today. It was an absolute honor to have you, my man.
Appreciate it. Always good to jam with you, Karl.
Awesome, my dude. Awesome.